Now, China. And I got to say, hallelujah, well done, thank God, that David Littleproud, the Agriculture Minister, belled the cat on China being able to call itself a developing country. Because if you are a developing country, then you don't have to do the net zero 2050 thing. You don't have to do the Paris 2005 thing. Instead, they can keep polluting till 2030, and then it's not net zero till 2060. It's why they don't have to turn up to things like this. But this so-called developing country has missiles that can go faster than any other missile in the world, hypersonic missiles. They've also got an international space station, and next year they're hosting their second Olympic Games this century. This, in part, is what the minister had to say.
Well, I think with respect to the definition of China, I think that's a big question mark whether they're still developing. I think we have to redefine that and look at those that really are, particularly those in our Pacific region.
It's exactly correct. I'll start with you first, Minister. Look, China can say it's a developing country because it's allowed to say it, but the reality is that it's very difficult to suggest you're a truly developing country when you've got a space program and you're, as I say, about to have your second Olympics this century.
It's great to be with you, Paul. And look, I mean, it's pretty much bang on, but they do have a very large proportion of their population who are poor, as do a number of other countries around the world. I mean, their emissions are up roughly 70%, is the advice I've got. But don't forget what's happened to the rest of the world as well. I mean, places like the UK have offshored their manufacturing into Asia, and particularly into China. And they're out there with a very much holier-than-thou attitude on a number of issues, when the reality is they've moved their manufacturing elsewhere. They still utilise all of those products. They still use them for everyday life. They still use them for their individual, I won't say pleasure, but certainly for the purpose they're intended to. And, where do they get off on this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, Matt, how do they get away with continually calling themselves a developing country? Because the truth is they've got 1 million people in Uyghurs who they're treating as slave labour. Yes, their system also means there's a certain percentage that are kept poor, but a developing country I think about is one in Africa that doesn't have a space program.
Well, Paul, firstly, I think it's disappointing that Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin and Bolsonaro from Brazil didn't show up to COP. They are some of the largest emitters in the world, and I think if we're going to be responsible about taking action on climate change as an international community, it would have been good to have those nations there. Nonetheless, China calls itself a developing nation because the rules allow it to. Under the way the WTO works, a nation can declare itself to be a developing nation.
Do you think those rules are wrong?
Well, that's what China's done. And I guess it depends on where you are in China. Certainly if you're in Shanghai or if you're in Beijing, it doesn't look like a developing country. But if you go to somewhere like Qinghai or Chengdu or other places like that, where you've got most people that live off less than $1 a day, it does have the characteristics of a developing nation. But
well, what would you say about Australia if we went to Tennant Creek?
Paul, other nations can challenge the status of another nation. So Australia could challenge it, but David Littleproud won't, because like many things, this government's all talk. They won't do it because they wouldn't want to risk.
Well, Matt, hang on.
They wouldn't want to risk the trading relationship of our farmers and other organisations like that. So, like a lot of things, they're all talk.
Tina, jump in.
Matt, he may do it. It's the World Bank and the United Nations that have put the criteria up and classed it as a developing nation, but it's clearly now an emerging nation. It's had 4 decades of a healthier economy. It's ridiculous. And don't underestimate Minister Littleproud or the government. I think we rightly should challenge that title it has now.
Well, we've got a cabinet minister here. Beef, are you going to challenge it?
Oh, Matt, I'm happy to take the question. There's no challenges here at all. If we look at what's happening with what is our biggest trading relationship, keep in mind this is a country that's not taken our coal, that's made decisions around particular elements of trade which we don't agree with. And we've said very clearly if they want to break the rules, well, then we'll take the actions that are necessary, and that's what we'll be doing.
So how many rules can they break before we do go off to challenge their status as a developing nation?
Well, let's look at what's happened here, Paul, in terms of our trading relationship. The price of thermal coal is some $240 US plus. In the midst of the pandemic, it was under 50. Now, China is not taking thermal coal. We've found other markets, and those markets have been profitable. Yes, there's probably more margin into the China market at the moment, but look at the impacts. We've got reports that there is energy shortages in China. That's meant a reduction in terms of production of things like magnesium. You've got the European Motor Association, I think it was, who are saying that potentially they'll be closing in the next few weeks because they can't source magnesium because most of it comes from China, which they're not producing.